Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of all of us at the locally based, independently owned bookstore Books and Books in Miami, Florida, and in partnership with Miami Book Fair, it's my pleasure to welcome you to a virtual evening with James Patterson and Matt Eversmann to discuss ER Nurses, True Stories from America's Greatest Unsung Heroes, published by our friends at Little Brown and Company. James Patterson is the world's best-selling author. His enduring fictional characters and series include Alex Cross, The Women's Murder Club, Michael Bennett, Maximum Ride, Middle School, and Ally Cross, along with such acclaimed works of narrative nonfiction as Walk in My Combat Boots, ER Nurses, and his autobiography, James Patterson by James Patterson. Bill Clinton and Dolly Parton are among his notable literary collaborators. For his prodigious imagination and championship of literacy in America, he was awarded the 2019 National Humanities Medal. The National Book Foundation presented him with the Literarian Award for Outstanding Service to the American literary community, and he is also the recipient of an Edgar Award and 9 Emmy Awards. We indie booksellers adore him, and since 2015, he has given holiday bonuses ranging from $500 to $5,000 to independent bookstore employees, and we can't thank him enough for his generosity. For ER Nurses, he has joined forces with Matt Eversmann, who retired from the Army after 20 years of service. His last assignment was as an infantry company first sergeant in the 10th Mountain Division during the surge in Iraq. He spent almost half of his career in the 75th Ranger Regiment and was a member of Task Force Ranger, the unit immortalized in the film Black Hawk Down. To moderate this evening's conversation, we're joined by Alison Levine. Alison is a history-making polar explorer and mountaineer. She has climbed the highest peak on each continent, served as team captain of the first American Women's Everest expedition, and skied to both the North and South Poles. Wow. Throughout this evening's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by using the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen, and you can order your copy of ER Nurses from Books and Books below. We truly appreciate every order and the generous donations from viewers everywhere. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage. Hello.
Yay.
Yay.
We're here. We're getting here. Hey, Matt. Hey, Matt.
Here you are.
All right, here we go.
Perfect.
Hi, everybody. Oh, wait, I've got to get Trooper. There he is, back in the frame.
All right, perfect.
Well, first of all, welcome to our audience. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I know you really came here to listen to Matt and Jim, so we're going to get to that in a second. I know you didn't come for the refreshments since it's virtual, so we don't have to worry about that. I know I have a ton of questions. And I'm sure the audience will have questions as well. So as you heard, please just enter your questions in the Ask a Question box anytime throughout this chat, and we'll get to them in about 35 minutes or so. But first of all, what an opportunity to be here tonight with two such incredible people. You both got great introductions, so I don't need to rehash your bios. But my burning question, first of all, is how did you two initially come together to collaborate on these books? Because I know ER Nurses just came out this week, so you can get a copy, the link at the bottom, but also you have this one, Walk in My Combat Boots. That was your first collaboration. And you have endorsements on the cover from Admiral McRaven, General McChrystal, and Bill Clinton. And I just figured, I don't know, guys like you, I figured you could have maybe gotten some more well-known people to endorse your book than these guys, but I don't know. So, hey, tell me how this partnership began.
Well, it all started in a bar. Tell them about it, Matt.
Yeah, they're all good stories. They did. And this is actually true because we did meet and met at a bar. And the very long story, somewhat shorter, in 2018, a mutual friend of ours, Tim Malloy, was going to take me to Afghanistan to do a documentary. And before we went, he said, I think we ought to talk to my friend Jim Patterson and sort of think about what it is we're trying to do. And literally Jim was very kind to come meet us and have a glass of wine and just chat a little bit about storytelling. And to cut to the chase, Alison, I'll never forget this as long as I live. Jim said something that is indelible, and he said that everybody walking around, everybody we'll ever meet has at least one really good story, no matter what. And it's one of those things that will make everyone else stop and say, wow, that's pretty cool. And I've never forgotten it. So this whole idea of storytelling, we learned from Jim.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what happened. Tim and Matt went over and made the film, and Matt did a lot of the interviews in the film. And I went, this guy is a great interviewer because a lot of military people, they don't want to talk about it when they come home. Like my dad came back from World War II. He never talked about what he did. And the same is true of nurses, especially emergency room nurses. They don't really want to talk about it. It's, they had their day and they're home and it's safe and whatever. And what Matt could do is get the stories out of them. And that's what makes this book so special. And I absolutely, if you're listening tonight, if by the end of this, we haven't convinced you to read this book, we messed up.
Yeah.
Because this is, one, it's the most important book I've ever done. And it's just unbelievably readable. And it's not to credit to us. It's a credit to the 57 nurses we tell their stories in the book. It's just one great story after another. Unbelievable stuff.
And first of all, how did you choose or find the nurses to participate in the book?
A piece of it was, I have a lot of connections to colleges. We have a lot of scholarships. We have some nursing scholarships. So we had good connections at University of Florida and Wisconsin and a few other schools. And then one thing led to another. Matt had some military connections, and what else?
Yeah, well, and from that, we were introduced early on to the Emergency Nurses Association, which has just been, they were spectacular. That's like the who's who in the zoo of emergency room nurses. And, Alison, it's one of those, once you meet one, contact that is an A+ person, they give you an A++ and an A, and it really was, it was just pretty delightful to just meet so many quality folks.
So,
and one of the things, Alison, about this book, and what makes it special is, I rarely, to most of it, do we read a book or see a film where we go, I didn't really understand that. I thought I did, and now I do. That's what will happen with this book.
Okay.
You will understand what these men and women do. And when we did Combat Boots, one of the things we said is the next time you're just trying to pitch your husband. He's in the book.
He is actually in the book.
Where's my damn book? I'm gonna hold this one up. Is this the one we're dealing with tonight?
No,
we wanted to. If you were a nurse, you would say they got it right, and we've done like half a dozen podcasts now, and every time, and the moderators who are always nurses, like one of them said, this book captures why I love being a nurse so much, just as an example.
Well, the reason I was going to hold this up for a second is because I was going to ask, how do you go from this to nurses? How did you decide? Because I know why this makes sense for you both. I know why this makes sense, but nurses, I was like, whoa, where did that come from? So I'm just curious how you decided to.
One part of it is that piece, as I said, we didn't feel nurses' stories had been told. We think everybody who's listening, they think they understand. Trust me, when you read this book, you will understand. Sanjay Gupta gave us this wonderful quote. I don't know Sanjay. And then Sebastian Junger, who's a wonderful, wonderful writer. He wrote The Perfect Storm and Freedom and War and whatever. And he said that this account of the twilight world between life and death that nurses inhabit is one of the most moving books I've ever read. And he said, when he finished, and he said he read right through it, he said it changed his life forever. And that's the kind of amazing response we're getting to these stories. And once again, we can't pat ourselves on the back for this. It's the nurses' stories.
And Alison, if I can just jump in real quick. What's shocking in one sense to your question, but really not once you start getting into it, is that, this soldier's heart, nurse's heart kind of relationship, they're almost the same person. And the more nurses that I talk to, they are so committed to this mission. They're selfless servants. They're dedicated to this cause, and they're in it to win it every day in the toughest of times. And it was actually one of those. It was really kind of cool. It's like these are the same people I just talked to a year ago. So I think when folks read this book, particularly if they've read Combat Boots, they're going to see these nurses are just as dedicated and tenacious. I mean, every adjective we use talking about soldiers, you could use for an ER nurse for sure.
And dedicated partly because they feel they have a mission in life, and they do. A lot of us will go through life and we'll go like, we're looking for meaning, and we'll find it sometimes in their family and whatever. Nurses, generally speaking, really find they're doing something really significant with their lives, and it makes it meaningful.
And what I think is special about ER nurses is they just never know what's coming down the trail, right? They never know
exactly
what
right.
they're going to be facing when they go into an emergency room. So that makes them unique. But Jim, what you said about people, you think you understand nurses and their mindset and what they do, but you're really, you're going to understand it on a completely different level when you read the book. I understand that. But the interesting thing is that while we may not all come into contact with an ER nurse in our lifetime, we will come into contact with some kind of nurse. Ourselves directly or through family members or something. And I'm thinking that this book is going to make us think differently about all nurses, not just ER nurses, but all nurses. And,
absolutely.
They do have to have that warrior mindset, especially, ER nurses have to have that warrior mindset.
I mean, Matt has seen a lot in combat, and a couple of times when we were doing this book and Matt did most of the interviews, he would call up and say, I got to take a couple of days off. Because these stories are just, wow, they're so emotional.
I would love to hear from each of you one story that you feel really resonates.
We'll tell a bunch
they
of
all
them.
resonate with you. But
we'll tell a bunch of them. Go ahead, Matt.
There's one.
Now you put a quarter in me. I won't shut up on this. There's so many different avenues to go when you say like, what's your favorite story? Because I think there's a lot of favorite stories, but the first one to me that really pops out was this ER nurse who was caring for a patient cancer patient, and just the 1-2 punch, and was pretty close to his end, and his wife was there, and they were just trying to go through that awkward moments, knowing that the end was coming. And this nurse, Katie Quick is her name, Katie, says to the wife, what do you think might make your husband a little more comfortable? And she said, well, I love his dog, or he loves his dog. And she said, well, why don't you get him? So she goes home, gets the dog. They do this clandestine up. They bring him, up the back stairwell, up to jump in the bed, and it's it's just one of those stories that you couldn't make up. It's not, there's no script to it. And yet has nothing to do with the blood and the guts and the gore and chest compressions, but it's everything to do with humanity. I think we all over that one.
Yeah. A couple of quickies. One, this kid came in 2 years old, had been shot accidentally in the chest. And they thought the kid wasn't going to make it for sure. Cut to 10 days later, the nurse is in the hospital, somewhere, another part of the hospital. She sees this kid. He's running down the hallway. He's wearing a Superman cape. And here's the happy story where it's like, oh my God, I thought this kid, another story was just amazing. And it's just one after the other. We had, one nurse who saw Kevorkian with his van, and he had come to the hospital. He was arrested there. But in this one, it was a black nurse helicopter duty, and the pilot was a black guy. And this is out in Oklahoma, and they had an emergency situation. They had to fly out. Somebody was terribly ill. They get over this farm, and the farm, all of the buildings, they have like swastikas painted on them and white supremacy stuff. So here's this black nurse and this black pilot, and they go, we don't care. Boom, they go down, they rescue this person, save the person's life. The supremacists are sort of like, okay, fine, go ahead, save the life, But and it's just one after the other in terms of just these amazing, amazing stories. And we'll tell more, but yeah.
I love hearing these stories. And the thing we sometimes forget about nurses too, is that they're there, in the ER when the patients are being treated. They're there for all the action, but they're also there, afterward, and they're comforting the patients. And there's just such a heavy emotional load, right, for them to carry. And we don't always think about them. And that's one of the reasons I'm really glad this book came out this week, because with the pandemic, of course, nurses have really been at the forefront of the discussion about this entire pandemic. And so I'm wondering, would you have still written this book? Would this book still be, coming out this week if we hadn't had the pandemic? Did that have anything to do with your decision?
Oh, we absolutely would have done it. In fact, when we did the interviews, Matt and I talked, and we said we're not going to ask about COVID until the end of the interview, because we wanted the nurse's whole story.
Yeah.
And each one of these stories, they're 4 to 8 pages. You will get a sense for that nurse, and there'll be a picture of the nurse somewhere in it, most of them anyway. And you will get some of their stories. But no, we wanted that, and we did not want this to be COVID heavy. I mean, there are some COVID stories in here, and some touching ones, and just some detail, of in general, like one nurse described what happens with some of these people when they can't breathe, and she described it like a guppy, like when they're on the it's like that kind of guppy sound. And but there's a lot of detail like that, and some of it very positive and uplifting, and some of it scary. But it's and a lot of people, and they love things like, remember ER, the TV show, and then Grey's Anatomy and
Carol Hathaway.
This is beyond that. I mean, just in terms of, and it's all true. And that's the other thing. I mean, we've been on Fox, and we've been on CNN, and we've been on news, whatever. And sometimes some of the people, they wanted to sort of make this a political thing. This ain't political.
No,
there's nothing political about this. It's not right, left, sideways, independent. It's just life and death and good people trying to do the right thing. Yeah.
And Alison, just as a little ridiculous piece of trivia to this question, Jim and I actually started talking about this like in 2019. I mean, before I think anybody ever heard of COVID. I mean, we didn't pull the trigger till later. But there's just, I recall, again, I think at a bar, maybe just over a cocktail, but this idea of like nurses would maybe be kind of cool, and thinking about that. So that, and like Jim said, when you read it, it's, and it's not all about COVID, and I'll tell you just a quick one, if you indulge me for a sec.
Please.
What I found, when we talked to some of these nurses, and even some of the ones, unfortunately, didn't make it into the book because it would have been, that thick. But particularly these nurses that went up to New York City early on, and there were several of them that went from all over the country. They all went to New York City, up to, spread out to all the different hospitals. But listening to them describe like being on the subway, being the only person on the subway, like literally the only person on a subway in New York City, the only person in Times Square, the only person, on a rare day off that's down looking at the Empire State Building, like that kind of stuff. Granted, it's not nursing, it's not CPR, but it's mind-boggling when we think back on that year. And, they saw it from the trenches. Again, like so many things, amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we knew it would be an effective book. We had no idea how much. I'll give you this is a good example of how, anybody who's listening, for the most part, they're not going to be prepared for how emotional the book is. One of the nurses that did one of the podcasts, she'd given the book, ER Nurses, to her mother the previous weekend. Like on Sunday or so, her mother came over to the house, and the mother was weeping. And she said, I never had any idea what you do, how hard it is, what a hero you are. And I love you so much. Here was the mother. And we've had similar things from spouses who've just said, I know some things about your job, but I had no idea, how amazing your job is.
I think this book really is going to help people understand the role these nurses play, the important role, and what they have to go through psychologically, and the PTSD that they could suffer from what they've gone through, and PTSG, right? Post-traumatic growth, or PTG. They talk about some people grow after trauma, right? They perform at a higher level versus just kind of melting down. But we saw on social media, it was heartbreaking. So many nurses just breaking down. They just reached that level where they couldn't handle it emotionally anymore. It was just too much. And so we saw little snippets of that on social media. And I think that helped really bring it home for people. But what I think is exciting about this book is that on social media, we just saw, a few seconds or a minute or two of video of nurses trying to explain what they were going through. But like when you really can sit down with them and capture their stories in more depth, I think that that's really not only meaningful for all nurses, for the entire profession, but for people, for all of humanity to really know these stories. Because once we started seeing them on social media during COVID, because we really didn't see stuff like this before COVID, we didn't see nurses, ripping off their masks and talking about what their day was like and what happened and the patients that they lost. Before COVID, we didn't see a lot of that. And we saw a lot of it during COVID. And I know people have such an appreciation for these nurses. And so while I think that this book is great for the world to read, to learn more about these nurses and what they do, but I also think it's just a wonderful tribute to them.
It will also change the way people are when we go into hospitals. We will see a nurse and we're going to feel something for them, something that we maybe didn't feel before. Anytime you see a nurse now, or a nurse comes and you're going to appreciate, oh my God, this person is here. This is hard stuff. And they do it in such a wonderful way. And a lot of us, we kind of take it for granted a little bit. I think you read this book and you if you go into, and we all go into hospitals, occasionally, and it's like, it'll change you. It will change you.
Yeah. I know, Matt, you've seen some tough stuff in your life throughout your military career, for sure. What was the hardest thing about, I'd love for both of you to answer this. What was the hardest thing about writing this book?
Well, I tell you, from my side of this foxhole, digesting just the severity of what these men and women deal with. And it doesn't matter whether you're in shock trauma in Baltimore or, a small 2-bed ER in, somewhere in Utah. They are dealing, on any given moment of any given day with the worst of the worst experiences that a human being can have, short of death. And they've got to deal with it. And to hear that over and over, and then kind of relate it to my military experience, say a deployment, it sucks for a year, you're in the shit for a year, pardon me, you're in tough time for a year, and then you come back and you get to refit. But they're on deployment their entire career, and that exhausts me. And as Jim said, and I make no bones about it, it's emotional to hear somebody talking about showing up in Chicago and having 11 people die in one day under their care. Yeah. You're like, I don't know what's even.
And knowing you're gonna you might have 12 the next day.
Yeah. For me, and once again, it's not a COVID book, but COVID is a piece of it. For me, it's the responsibility, one, to get the writing right so that it tells their story. Just an incredible responsibility for each of the 57 stories. That we got this one. This is the way it should be. And then right now, it's a responsibility we feel to get out there and encourage people to read the damn book, because it is so important. Yesterday, we started out, Matt and I, at 6 a.m. We did our first interview. We did the last one at midnight, and we're old. But that's the passion we feel for this thing, that we're out here and trying to get people to see, because some people will go, it's just a bunch of interviews. No, man, it is not. This is not just, this will knock your socks off. You will not forget reading this book.
And just if I could, just to add on to Jim's piece, because they're part of all of our communities. No matter where you live, there's an ER that's going to service you. Doesn't matter, it might be miles and miles away. A helicopter's going to take you there, but these men and women, I didn't even really occur to me what a part of our communities they are. And I know it sounds like I'm running for office, but man, they are. If they're not around, what are we going to do? on your worst day. You want the best of the best, and I'm telling you, they're hard to beat.
And how do we do right by them now? You mentioned, PTS. Yeah, we need to recognize that and help them more. They're underpaid. Their wages need to be better. We need to appreciate them more.
Yeah, that was my next question: is what can we do? We, America, other countries, what can we all do to support them more, to show our appreciation more? What can we do?
One of the things is just literally thank nurses.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Because especially emergency room nurses, they don't hear it that much. And that came again and again and again, where because usually somebody will either leave and they're gone, or they go upstairs and a lot of times they don't even hear what happened to the patient. And they don't think, I can't blame them, but they don't think to come back and thank the emergency room nurses. When somebody does come back, and you see this in the book and in the interviews, they're like, oh my God, that just made my day that somebody thanked me. So, if you're in the hospital and you see, just thank you. And if they say, for what? Just for doing what you do, man, because you take it for granted, but we shouldn't take it for granted. Just imagine, the heroic stuff that people do. You would just, hug them. No, I don't mean hug them, but I mean,
pre-COVID, people hug them, but now
it's amazing what they do. Yeah.
It really is amazing. And I mean, Matt, you brought up such a great point that, when you're deployed, it's for a finite amount of time.
Yeah.
Usually when any of us are in some kind of uncomfortable situation, for me, if I'm on an expedition, I know it's, 2 months of discomfort and at the end it's going to be good. But these nurses, these men and women, they do sign up for an entire career of this, and they
love it. They love it.
The hardest day in the world, and they know the next day they can come back and it might be even harder. And there's no day that's going to be a breeze for them. There's no day where they can just coast through their day.
A piece of this for me is, my best friend growing up, best girl, not girlfriend, but friend who was a girl. She's an emergency room nurse, and then she ran the emergency room at St. Luke's Hospital in Newburgh for like 30 years. And she just told me stories forever about, her experiences there. And that, obviously, and on my wife's mother also, she ran an emergency room at University of Wisconsin Hospital.
And, and Alison, to just, again, that comment we talked a minute ago about with PTS and everything, and then sort of rolling into their work schedule. I also want to say that, like soldiers, not everybody is in a emotional predicament, but if they are, that's okay. And when Jim and I were chatting before, we've been talking throughout this whole process. It's sort of strange that we look at soldiers with, say, like PTS, and we're like, okay, that's good. Stigma's done. Go ahead and take care of it. But with nurses, there's this is 2 steps backwards, and but it's certainly not all of them, but there are quite a few that I was very concerned about after talking to them. But, like soldiers, I tell you, this isn't a profession, cowboys of nursing, they say. You can't hide. You either like put your head down and move forward, or you're done. And they're tough as nails, and God love them that they are always there for us. It's quite motivating, actually.
Yeah,
and,
with every day.
With combat, with that book, they're teaching that book at West Point now. And I think this book would be really valuable in nursing schools all over the country. I'm not trying to sell books, but it would be really good for kids that are to read this, because this is the real world. This is what you're going to deal with when you get out into the world. You're going to, and this is, and here's some of the heroes of your profession,
Yeah, if you're considering a career in nursing, or somebody is considering a career, this is a great book for them to be able to read all of these different stories, all of these accounts from people that are in the thick of it day in and day out, so they can really understand what it's like. And I think you also brought up a great point before about, people thank the doctors all the time. And you remember, like, I've had a few surgeries and I remember all the doctors' names, but I'm embarrassed to say that I don't remember the nurses' names. I don't remember the ER nurses' names. And I feel terrible that I don't, but we should know their names just as much as we should know the doctors' names.
It's a funny thing with names. When I was out at Mayo it wasn't a bad thing, but a couple of days. And the nurse that took care of me, her name was Angela Hoot. And I said, what a great goddamn name. I'm going to put that in a book. And I named a main character in a book called First Case, Angela Hoot. So I remember her name.
But Alison, whether it was you with your surgeries or Jim or, my little weasel surgery of an appendectomy, the thing is these men and women are there. You don't even know it because you're knocked out, but there are advocates. And when you read this book and you jump out, and some of them are, young mid-20s somethings, then they're going literally nose to nose, toe to toe with a doctor saying, no, man, this is what this patient needs. And, I had no idea that stuff went on. And so when you think about the responsibility and the accountability that these men and women have, I had no idea. And again, champions, just every single one of them, champions.
Yeah.
Really incredible. Well, we're going to go to questions in just a minute. But before we do that, I wonder if there's anything else you want to get in there before we go to questions. And we'll obviously give you some time at the end to wrap up as well. But
let's see what they have to ask.
I'll jump in here. All right. So, okay, Mr. Patterson, Mr. Eversmann, thank you for this evening. What did you find most important and or challenging to you both in bringing this novel to fruition and on to the readers?
Matt? Well, I talked about once again, just the responsibility that we felt. The responsibility to do it right. Sometimes, and they will talk about that there are very few emergency room nurses where they're in there for the paycheck. I mean, obviously they want to get paid, but that's not what drives them. And they couldn't do it for the money. You couldn't pay them, they just feel that responsibility. And I think for us, a lot of that was the same thing. We got to get this one right. We have to get this story right. And then we have to get the word out to people that this book exists. And then hopefully the other thing that our audience can do is pass the word. Let other people know. Book clubs. You do your book clubs. I guarantee you, people do book clubs over some goofy novel, even some of mine. How much can you talk about it? Here's Alex Cross, and okay, you got shot at, and whatever, blah 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 blah. This thing you can talk. Your book club could talk about it for a week.
All the different stories. Yeah, so many stories, probably for multiple weeks. And I just want to remind everyone again, you can purchase it. There's a link, right here on this webinar. There's a link down at the bottom where you can purchase the book. So please go ahead and do that. And we really love supporting local independent bookstores.
Totally.
It's really important. So
Books and Books is great.
Great. They really are. All right. Did you find anything particularly surprising to you during your research process?
I would tell you, there, and I go back to story mode, but before the specifics, to answer that question, I guess I was surprised that just volume comes to mind. The volume that these, again, whether you're in Detroit receiving or Baptist Hospital in Dallas, moonlit night on full moon on 2:00 in the morning on Saturday, man, it's coming. And it happens like clockwork. And it's always happening. It's a trail. We use, the gerbil trail or the hamster trail. Like, I guess it's one of those, like, you think like, of course, Matt, that would happen. But I was really blown away just by the volume that these men and women deal with all the time. Like we said, for their whole career, it's crazy.
One of the things that totally surprised me, and this really came out of the blue, is if Matt and I wanted to write a book about the underbelly of this country, where do you go? Like, you go in some neighborhood, who's the craziest person on the whatever. I wouldn't know where to start. Go to emergency
Politicians.
rooms. No, go to emergency rooms. They see this every day. Like the first time I read somebody had burned their child, I go, oh wow, no, this is common. People, they burn their children. It's bizarre. There was one woman, a 600-pound, and they couldn't figure out how to get her into the damn hospital. Like they had to find, a delivery area to bring her in. And then they had to call the fire department because the box springs were attached to her body from her bed. She'd been in her bed so long. I mean, just the underbed, the stuff, it's just amazing. And I had no idea. I had no idea we were going to hear some of these stories. I won't tell the pregnant man story, but that's another one. It's like, what the, or the woman, there was a mafia guy in there. And he didn't like the way he was being treated, and he said, I know where you live, I know your address, okay, whatever, yeah, amazing stories.
So we've got a bunch more questions, but here's a comment from Pat Brower that I just want to relay to you both. And Pat says, I am reading ER Nurses now as an ER nurse for 37 years. Thank you, Pat. Thank you. Thank you. I can relate to all of the stories I've read so far. My ER coworkers were my family and I'm still close with most of them. Also reading Walking in My Combat Boots and related personally since one of the veterans listed went to the VA clinic I worked at after my retirement from the ER. Thank you both for 2 great books. So I just wanted to make sure you all saw that. All right. Any plans to do a book about small town police officers?
Yes, we're doing it right now. We're researching. It's not small town, but it's all over the country.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one we're doing. We're literally, I don't know, we've done. Well, Matt's done, as Matt does almost all the interviews, but about 60 some interviews.
Yeah, I think we're at like 62.
And that's another, they're so different. The combat and the nurses and the police, it's 3 different universes and really fascinating stuff.
And when you look across the board, I would just throw this out, Alison. Whatever is going on, like up here in everybody's little cartoon brain about what they think they know about all 3, it's like you don't. I'm telling you, you don't. I thought I knew a lot about soldiering, and I started talking to these truck drivers and forklift operators and pilots and everybody. I'm like, I learned so much doing combat boots. Nurses, same thing. Cops, same thing. No matter what you think you know, I'm telling you, you're wrong. Right off the bat, you're wrong.
Because there's so many stories out there and these people don't have a medium, or they didn't have a medium to share them.
And the other part of it is, unfortunately now, so many people, they'll caricature. They'll go, oh, Wisconsin cheesehead, whatever. We want this like just a simple little silly image of something. Oh, cops. Show of it. No, don't do the caricatures. All these things are complicated. The story, and that's the beauty of doing a thing like this. You see the breadth of the stories. You see the complexity. You see the humanity. The humanity is not, there's no caricature. There's no nurse. There are nurses. There's no cop. There are police. You know what I mean? There's no, it's a bunch of different experiences.
Well said. I mean,
we all really grow when we read a book like this too. When we read a book about, what these nurses go through, even though it can feel kind of traumatic reading their stories. I'm sure some of them are happy stories and some of them don't have great endings. But I think that we all grow as a society when we read these stories and we process the emotion that other people are going through.
So, Alison, I got to just jump in. I just got to throw one quick. I know you're on a time for questions.
No, we got plenty of time.
To that point, so we had a mother-daughter, 2 nurses, up north, and the mother, both ER nurses, and the daughter. I was talking to her. I said, what got you into nursing? And she's like, oh, I grew up with it. And she told me the story. She said, one day a little kid, she's little, she's waiting for her mom to get off the night shift to take her to school. And, the mother calls home and says, hey, basically you're going to have to walk to school in, the UP in the winter and, get your mucklucks on and walk to school. I got something to do. And the story was the mother had gotten off her shift, midnight shift, gets off in the morning. There's this 90-year-old lady sitting in the emergency room waiting room. Just kind of sleeping, that she'd been treated the night before. And, the nurse recognizes her and goes over and says, hey, ma'am, what's up? And she's like, well, I don't have anybody to pick me up. So, here I am. And, the nurse just says, well, listen, let's go get some breakfast and I'll take you home. And you're like, you can't make it up. I mean, you cannot make, to Jim's point about they're nurses, and you hear that and you're like, man, I could be a much better person. I could be a better person if I did that.
Yeah.
I think we can all learn from the compassion that these nurses practice every single day. They practice compassion in incredibly stressful situations, stressful and emotional situations, and they have to keep it together. They have to keep it together because they cannot lose their shit in the ER, no matter how emotional the situation becomes.
I wrote a kid's book about Muhammad Ali when he was a kid in Louisville, when he was Cassius Clay. And one of the things that Muhammad said, which is, I think, part of the what nurses are all about, he says, everybody gets knocked down. The trick is getting the hell up.
Yeah.
And that's what, I mean, these nurses every day, man, they're getting up again. They're getting up again. They're getting up again.
Yeah. Here's a question about from Lori. Do you go over violence to nursing in ER staff in the book? Are there any stories about, like, I guess, violent situations? That's a question.
Yeah, Matt.
We'll have to read the book to find out.
Yeah, no, they're
Oh,
go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, no, sorry, Jim. I didn't mean to.
Yeah, no, go.
Yeah, I mean, I would put that there. One, there are, and two, going back a couple of questions ago about surprises, that was another one. I had no idea. You know, the stories that I talked, you know, the number of times I had nurses from, you know, the 5'1" petite, you know, 20-something to the 6'4", you know, weightlifting male that got their asses handed to them in fights with patients. And not just people that had, you know, all of the people just get mad. People getting choked by by an IV tube. I mean, it's crazy. That happens.
It's not like it happens every day, but pretty much all of them have had at least one experience with it.
And then you still have to go back to work. You can't be like, yeah, that was too traumatizing for me.
And sometimes, I mean, there was one where this guy, and they took him out of his bed and they found a machete in there. And then they found that this guy was a serial killer in Detroit. So, I mean, you get that stuff, I mean, at the far extremes. But I mean, we don't get that much into the violence, but if you read the interviews, it happens for sure.
Yeah. Here's a note from Leslie. This isn't a question either. I know it's supposed to be questions, but these people are so grateful to you for writing this book. So I just want to make sure that you are.
Please. We love praise.
Comments. Not a question, but thank you so much for this story. Too often people just think we give meds and that we started IVs and did dressings and charted, but there is so much more that is unseen, which we do. Thank you. I mean, Leslie, that's amazing. But this is exactly why they wrote the book, right? I mean, this is so great. Like we do all need to know that, because we see nurses just walking past us and we don't know their backstory, but we're going to know it now once we read the book. I can't wait for mine to arrive, by the way. Here's another one. Do you have plans for a book about firefighters as well?
We've talked about that. It's possible. I don't know where I know we're doing cops because we're doing it.
Yeah.
and I'm not sure where we'll go from there, and you know what Matt is interested in doing, but we'll see. Yeah. But that we've talked about that as a possibility. Yeah.
And just this question from me, but do you two have plans to collaborate again? Do you think?
Oh, see how well. I mean,
see if you still like each other after this book tour.
We like each other. We like hanging out. It's a good thing. It's really been a glorious thing for us to do both of the books.
Yeah,
it's a fantastic collaboration. It's not one I would have just thought of offhand to put the two of you together like that, but obviously it works, right? It works because this is your second collaboration now, and then the first one was amazing, and I can't wait to read this one. But just bringing these stories to the forefront, that's what you two are good at, and we all need more of them, right? And I think that
right now, especially, man, I mean, it's just so hard to get. I mentioned like there's no politics in this, and just we're all aching to just hear the truth. Just please, just lay the truth out. And there's nothing but truth in this book. Yeah. We have no agendas. We're not, it's just here it is. Here, just read their stories, man. Come to your own conclusions.
And the more of these stories that you bring to us, the more we read and the more we learn, I think the more compassionate we become
Yeah.
about not.
Well, I'd like to do teachers. I just to be a little nervous about whether we could get people excited about it. But teachers, it's really complex for teachers now. It's very hard. It's harder than it's ever been. It's it's not what people, certainly my age, they didn't have that. My mother was a teacher for 40 years. She didn't have to put up with the stuff teachers have to deal with now.
I think that would be an incredible book, by the way, because people know also since COVID, right? I think all parents have a better understanding of what teachers deal with, of how hard their job is. Once kids were being homeschooled and parents had to take over as teachers, I think it gave them a better understanding of what it's like to actually be a teacher. But we don't know the stories from the classrooms. We don't know about the tough neighborhoods and what these teachers go through and what they're in the heartbreak that they feel when they're working with a student that's struggling. I think a book about teachers would be absolutely incredible. So here's another question. There are other health professionals that also work side by side with the nurses in the ER. Are these addressed in the book at all? There's hospital pharmacists, medical residents. Do the nurses that you interview, do they get into the stories at all of working with these other people that are also involved in the process?
Jim, if I can jump in on that real quick, learned a lot. And the short answer, yes, they are. Although remember, the title is ER nurses, so it sort of focuses on them. However, there are nurses that were EMTs and paramedics. There were nurses that were ER techs. There were nurses that started off in nursing homes, whatever it was, or these were guys and gals that had then progressed on to, some other part of nursing life. But, when we started, we were, I'm like, hey, listen, if you were an ER nurse, I'd like to talk to you. And at some point in your career. And so that, we did touch on that. And you do hear these stories, which, by the way, I will just throw this out. Not that anybody in the scale of justice is any better or any worse, but those ER techs are, man alive, we need to get more kids getting into that line of work, to progress all the way through the system, because there's more than one story about somebody that was an ER tech that literally saved the day, even though they're just the
their team.
They're right there. It's awesome.
Well, another in terms of relationships is the relationships between a lot of these nurses and the cops.
Yep.
Big time.
Absolutely.
Great respect and friendships developing. Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, because the cops are bringing in a lot of the, it's like somebody's been shot, somebody's been a motorcycle crashed or whatever, Yeah.
And also these nurses having to treat people that are brought in. Maybe they're the gunmen.
Yeah.
A place. And the gunman got shot as well. Now they're in the ER and they've got to do everything they can do to save this person.
What was that motorcycle story, Matt?
Crime.
Yeah, no, the guy that drove his motorcycle through the front door of the ER. I hate to beat up on Detroit, but I think it was in Detroit. But drove through and laid it down in the ER, still running. He's like,
he's been shot twice.
I've been shot. You got to help me. And this nurse goes out to take care of him, and she looks at the cop and it's like, hey man, you know how to turn that thing off? He's like, I got it. Don't worry.
Yeah, because the motorcycle was still on in the,
Oh, you can't make it up. I mean, it's better than television. It really is.
Here's a question from Doreen, which I'm going to answer. Doreen writes, I've read all James Patterson's books, nonfiction and fiction. Any plans on retiring anytime soon from writing? No, Doreen, no, we are not allowing this. You're not allowing them to retire.
Listen, let me tell you something about retiring. You don't retire from play.
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
That's what I do. I don't work for a living. I play for a living.
We've got some teachers on here just, high-fiving you right now for talking about teachers. So a lot of appreciation, a lot of love coming from the audience here.
Yeah. As I said, my mother taught for, forever and ever and ever. And one of the things we do is we work with Scholastic, and last year we paid for like 18,000 classroom libraries, because a lot of times they expect teachers to buy these books for their classroom libraries. And my mother did, and she was at Catholic school. They didn't pay anything for starters. I mean, the priest expected you to teach there for free or something. And then you had to, buy your classroom library books. So So, it's very dear and very close to my experience and my heart.
Amazing. Thank you for doing that. Here's a good one. Do you explore vocation in the book? It's fascinating to understand what leads you to want to be in this kind of setting and do this kind of work. What do you get into that? When we read this book, will we understand what motivates these ER nurses to want to be ER nurses?
I think so. I mean, I think at some point during, their history, when we talk, much like soldiers, Alison, it's like, why'd you join the Army? Why'd you become a nurse? So, there's what starts on one end isn't always the same thing through, but it's that, there's some drive that gets them through the nursing school door. And then from there, once they're all attracted, it's like electromagnet to the ER. Once they get there, man, it's just, all systems go.
But all of the nurses we dealt with in the interviews, and one in particular where this guy, he just knew he wanted to do it, but he couldn't get into a program, didn't quite. And he just kept badgering, and he finally wrote this letter to this small clinic out in the sticks, and he said, "I will do anything. I will lick the floors in this hospital. I'll do anything." And he got in. He got in.
Wow, that kind of dedication to really want to do that, because I mean, to be an ER nurse too, that's where all the action is all the time. Like, it's going to be action all the time. I know when you're an ICU nurse, it's probably also incredibly emotional.
Yeah.
But it's
we covered ICU in here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Here's another. Oh, okay. We just a lot of love. Like, we, okay. Oh, Rami, I want to thank you. I won your Scholastic giveaway a few years back. My family loves books, and I try to instill that in my students.
Nice.
Great.
Nice.
Great.
How cool is that?
It's super cool. Here's a question for both of you. And you can't say each other. Let me just preface it by saying you can't say each other. Who is your favorite writer for each of you?
My favorite book is 100 Years of Solitude, on the real serious. And then two books that really helped me to develop my style, and people wouldn't be aware of these too much, but Evan Connell Jr. wrote these two books, Mrs. Bridge and Mr. Bridge. He wrote them 10 years apart, and it's a Kansas City family, and one book is just her view of their life together, and the other one is his view of their life together. And they're wonderful, witty and interesting, and short chapters and whatever. So those are a couple of my real favorites.
Yeah, I have to, it's a toss up on just the pure pleasure reading between Michael Lewis and PJ O'Rourke for me. I love them both. Mm-hmm. I have been, and you're going to beat me up on this. I have really been trying to get through, a lot of Ernest Hemingway's books. Molly, our daughter, well, Molly, our daughter,
she's right above your head.
Yeah, very good. Molly has done it with Breeze, and it's been hard for me, but it's one of those, like, I feel compelled to get through. And but definitely Michael Lewis and PJ O'Rourke, I really, really enjoy their stuff. Like, I reread that. I read it and then reread them. So
I like PJ O'Rourke too.
They're both good.
And sometimes you just, the world can feel very heavy these days, and sometimes you just want reading that just, like, easy, kind of fun, just to, like, take you on an escape, take you on a vacation from all the chaos and all the hardship and all the tough things going on in the world. I think we all need that break on occasion to just read something that feels, light.
Well, and I say this now, since the moratorium is over, I can say, I put a plug in for this gentleman on my right shoulder that, back to the opening salvo was everybody's got a story, and we like to hear stories. And with Jim and I talked about this with fiction, with nonfiction, there's so many nonfiction books that are great topics, but are just so doggone boring. You just you want to punch yourself for it. But, Jim,
and they're still caught in the 50s and whatever. Like, this is where we have to do it because in academia, it's done in a certain way. And we have, 80 pages of footnotes and stuff like that. And there's nothing wrong with that, except for a lot of people, it's more than they want to know.
Yeah.
Tim, did you always know you would switch to you would jump into nonfiction at some point too, or were you?
It was a little bit of an accident. Matt mentioned our friend Tim Malloy, and once again, Tim and I were in a bar, and we had done a documentary movie, which Murder of a Small Town. It was about Belglade, Florida, and where I grew up, Newburgh, New York. And it actually won a couple of Emmys. And then we were thinking about doing another one. And he started telling me the story, which I didn't know, about Jeffrey Epstein. And then we went out and we did Filthy Rich. We did it in 2016. And, you know, I went to CNN and Fox and everybody, and they weren't that interested. What's the big deal? Then in like all of a sudden in 2008, and it's complicated why. And anyway, but that was the first nonfiction that I did, Filthy Rich.
And I've got I really want to read this comment to you both. And then we'll go back. I think we're going to have to wrap up in just a minute, but this says, not a question again, just want to say, I shared this book with an emergency department group I am on Facebook with, and many people already commented that they bought the book and they read it in one day and loved it. They all thank you, as do I. We often go unnoticed and are the evil stepsister of the hospital per se. So thank you. That comes from Lori. So you can already see the reception that you are getting from people who have read this book. For those of you who have not read it, again, the link is at the bottom. You can see this book, it has so much impact. And it's going to change the way that you think about these ER nurses. So please pick up a copy if you have not already. And thank you for everybody who submitted your questions and your comments. Those were really, really wonderful to read.
Yeah.
And I popped back out also just to say that people are reading now more than ever. Yeah. Truly, because of the pandemic, people have started reacquainting themselves with the whole like magic of reading. So it's really quite wonderful in that regard.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I want to hear about the pregnant man. I need to read about that.
Yeah, you'll find it's another one of these like unbelievable stories. I won't go into that one today. So that's something people, you got to read the book to get that one.
Well, this was a fantastic conversation, and I want to thank you for being with us tonight, for supporting independent bookstores, for supporting Books and Books and Miami Book Fair. Just to thank everyone who's joined us. Remember, you can purchase the book if you haven't already. And we have it at all of our stores in Miami. If you're in Miami, you can stop by there too. It's not too early to start shopping for the holidays.
Good point.
Right? Yeah. And, you know, we thank you, Mr. Patterson, for all of your support throughout the years. And just, we love selling your books and featuring your books. And it's just fantastic, everything that you have done for us. So thank you. And thanks for illuminating that. You know, I love that whole, who was it? Was it Sebastian Younger that said it was a Twilight world? A Twilight world?
The Twilight world of,
That's really fascinating. And I think maybe you should also consider doing a book on booksellers.
Okay. All right.
There's a lot of, interesting characters there too. So thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone watching. Maybe we'll just open the chat and let people say hi as we go. Is there anything you'd like to send us off with? Any final words about the book?
Hopefully we've said enough for people to get a real sense of it. So as I said, if you don't want to read it, we didn't do our job. And it is these nurses' stories, and it relates to all nurses. So hopefully we've done what we should be doing.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again for joining us, and have a great evening. Stay safe.
Yeah, thank you for doing this, Allison. Thank you for you. It was great.
Pleasure.
You're a wonderful moderator.
It's been an honor. Thank you for
Matt, as
writing
always.
this incredible book.
Jim, I'll see you tomorrow.
Tomorrow, absolutely.
I
I don't know what we're doing, but we're doing it.
It'll be
I hope
good.
we're going to see all of you in person soon.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank
Bye-bye.
you so much.
Bye.
Have a good night. Allison, thanks again. Awesome.
My pleasure.
Thank you.